The cab, there we go. Starting the recording. Oh, Eric Isler, yes, from Athens, Coney. Good to see you, sir. So we have two elected folks here tonight, I think, if unless there are some that are not recognized as such. But El Madi Holly from Henry and DeKalb County and Eric Isler from Athens, Coney. You're always welcome to join us. No campaigning, however, you know that. That's off limits here, but thank you for joining.
Phyllis Miller from DeKalb County.
Thank you, Phyllis. So we're going to get started in just a second here, and we'll be doing a presentation. And again, if you have questions, you can note the slide number that the question is on, or if you have a general question of any kind, write it in the chat as you go, and we will endeavor to answer as many questions as we can. Tonight, presentation will be by myself and Dave Thomas, who will be spotlighting in just a second. Dave is the leader of our advocacy team down at the Capitol, as well as elsewhere. Um, and he and I will be speaking, and Beth Stevenson and John Stevenson will be monitoring the chat. So it's about six after. I think we'll get it. We'll have a start here. Again, thank you very much for joining this evening. Um, I'm going to be presenting on the screen here, which means I won't be able to see any hand motions or anything. So again, your best bet to get a question is to put something into the chat. Okay. So let me get started here. Again, thank you for joining our program this evening. We wanted to recap Win Against Gerrymandering tonight. As you know, there was a special session of the legislature scheduled for the 17th of June, and we were planning to see some new maps produced during that session. And there weren't new maps produced, which is in all a win. And we'll talk about what that means. Our agenda tonight is what happened during that special session. We're actually going to talk about all the work that was done to prepare for the special session, and some of you were involved in that, and we thank you if you were volunteers involved in that. We'll talk about what actually happened in the legislative session. As a nonpartisan group, we have to be careful not to talk too much about the sort of the political stuff, but we have to get involved in a little bit of it. We're going to talk about what happens next and what do we do next to prepare for that. We have a couple new website features you can use. We hope to be able to show and demonstrate those, and then we'll have Q&A time. So, with that, let's talk about the legislative session. So, there was a lot of work that was put in to prepare for this session. Now, I will tell you that we had a sense that something might happen. Just to recap the timeline, right? The Supreme Court issued that decision, that nasty decision about the Voting Rights Act in very late April. And so it was just shortly after that that Governor Kemp called the special session of the legislature, and he included in that call an option for the legislature to consider changes to maps. There were other things also addressed in that legislative session, like the barcode on the ballot issue and some other issues with property tax and things like that, which I know were talked about. But one of the main features was supposed to be new maps were being considered as well to that session. So we really had from the end of April to about the middle of June to do all this work to get ourselves ready for that special session. The work was in the area of research where we built new tools, benchmarks, and scorecards. We'll show you some of that work. Communication, we produced an op-ed for the papers. We did press releases. We released a poll. We built a dedicated webpage on our website so you could follow along. And then Dave's going to talk about all the work that was done to prepare for the actual on-site advocacy with other groups and Fair Districts Georgia. So let's take those in order: research, communication, and legislative advocacy. So in the research world, we have a team of people that do research work, of whom Beth and John Stevenson, who are hosts tonight, are two of those people. Um, we wanted to create new benchmarks for fair maps. We also wanted to have a map comparison tool. A couple different ways we can measure a map when it's produced. One is comparing it to a standard benchmark, like what's good, right? And so these new benchmarks we wanted to create are statistical ranges for both political and demographic values. Think of these as yardsticks. If you have a map, you can say, let's compare it to a standard and say, Well, where does it fall on a scale of good to bad against that yardstick? But we can also compare the map to the existing map. So we have a rapid map comparison tool. And if somebody's not on mute, could you please make sure you're on mute while we're presenting? I appreciate that very much. Um, and so we also have a map comparison tool that can take the old map, the new map, and say, what are all the changes, political changes, demographic changes, etc. And then those tools generate tons of data. And so then we had to produce some presentable scorecards. Like how would you summarize that like a report card, right? So we're going to talk about all that preparation work on the research side. So in terms of the benchmarks, just for a little bit of history, the prior benchmarks we had been using were from 2021, the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. If you all were here with us at that time, you saw that we worked with Princeton to create these map grades. They ran simulations of a million maps for each of our maps, so we could understand the partisan lean, competition, and black representation. Those benchmarks, however, assumed that the Voting Rights Act was in place to protect existing districts for black voters, right? And that those benchmarks were an extremely useful advocacy tool. One of the key points in the debate in the 2021 redistricting special session was what grade were the maps from Princeton, right? Very, very hot topic. And so we thought those benchmarks were extremely useful. However, they hadn't been updated since 2021. So we undertook a piece of work to update those benchmarks. And I say we, the work was led by a new volunteer named Vish Ganapathy. I don't think he's with us tonight. He's on vacation on a well-deserved rest. But Vish has joined our team back in early springtime and has just started to produce a wealth of tools, and some of them are the benchmarks. In addition to in-house, we consulted with experts, a professor named David Cottrell from the University of Georgia, and then we talked to two people from a group called the Alarm Group, ALARM, which is a national group that provides map evaluation platforms. We updated the election data to go all the way from 2018 to 2024 instead of just through 2020, which is what we had for the Princeton work back in 2021. And we also had to change the model because now the Voting Rights Act no longer provides that legal protection for maps, for districts. And so we had to think about how do you generate a benchmark when the Voting Rights Act isn't there as a legal protection. However, the maps still need to comply with what's right in terms of representation for minorities. So it changes the model a little bit. So we did a lot of work to update the benchmarks. Now the challenge here was that this was a ridiculously short period of time, right? We thought something might happen. We started this work really in early May, and by the middle of June, tried to get ready to do all this stuff. I would say that it was a ridiculously short challenge, and Vish came up to speed very quickly. So in terms of benchmarks, yardsticks, we produced new partisan lean and competitive results that we thought made sense. We've produced new demographic benchmarks for white, minority, and black districts. But we ran into an interesting question, which is post Calais or post that Supreme Court decision, how do you define an appropriate balance of districts for multiple demographic groups? How do you determine the right number? Well, it turns out it's not an obvious question. And we decided that we were not the expert enough within Fair Districts, Georgia, to answer that question by ourselves. And so we decided not to try to tackle that question in those benchmarks. We have now reached out to some experts to help us with that post the session to get ready for the next round, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the benchmarking work, we did well with it. It still needs refinement. And as a sample of what we produced down at the bottom, our tool produces, for example, a seat vote proportionality that talks about, you know, how many districts should there be for different political parties and how many districts there are in the enacted map. Here we're showing, for example, the state Senate saying the state Senate map, the enacted map has 23 districts that are Democratic leaning, but that's pretty low on the scale where it should be. It should be more to the middle of that distribution. So that's the kind of data that we can get out of good benchmarks. And we got some of that done, but not all of it that we wanted to get done. And again, we ran into this interesting policy question of without the Voting Rights Act in place the way it was, how do you judge the right number of districts for different demographic groups? So we decided at the end of the day to not try to produce final benchmarks, but instead rely on the map comparison tool, right? Let's look at the old map, the new map, and define, look at all the changes that would occur from an old map to a new map. And this honestly is what we did during the 2023 redistricting cycle, right? Remember in 2023, we had 2021 maps that were done after the census. The court then ordered new maps for black voters. So the new maps were produced in 23. And we thought the best approach was to look at what's different between the map that was drawn in 21 versus the map drawn in 2023. And so these tools give us a wealth of data about what's different. Now, we're not going to show you that output here because we didn't get new maps, as we'll talk about, but we were practicing using old maps, right? It basically compares existing to proposed map. It identifies all the changes, what districts might have flipped in terms of partisan lean. Did we gain or lose competitive districts? Did we gain or lose minority districts? How many voters were moved among different districts? That's a really important metric. If we are moving voters unnecessarily, that's really important to know. And of course, the tool creates a wealth of maps and graphics. An example of the graphic is on the right-hand side. This particular graphic, I'm not going to go through it in detail because it's a trial example, but it shows between the old map, the enacted, and the proposed, how did the population shift from districts on the old map to the new map. So you can have a visual to see that in this particular case, a lot of people would have moved from this district over here, I think it's called E6, over to P7, so District 6 to District 7, right? Oops, sorry, I clicked too many times here. Hold on. I'm sorry. There we go. So that's just an example of the graphics, right? Again, Vish did a great job to update this tool to a more permanent code base. It automatically generates a great report, and it automatically generates visualizations. So the net is we were ready to compare maps, but it turns out we didn't have to because the legislature decided not to build maps, and we'll talk about that, why that happened in just a second. So again, the research team in Vish leading did a great piece of work around benchmarking and a new map comparison tool that we are going to use in the future, but at the end of the day turned out not to be actually required because the legislature decided not to do anything. I'm going to turn the program now over to Dave. Dave Thomas is our chief advocate and was leading all the work necessary once we had the research stuff working. How do you actually get ready to advocate and be present at the legislature, right? And so now, if we can spotlight Dave in the video, Dave, go ahead and pick it up from this on slide 8.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you all for coming. I want to reinforce something that Ken said, that this is sort of a celebration. We had a victory in this legislative session because nothing happened specifically with regard to our redistricting. So it's not the end of the story, but this is good news, basically. We did not know that the maps were not going to be considered. And early on in the process, we didn't actually know all of the players that might be introducing maps. So we had to really gear up, assuming we had to have this map conversation. So prior to the session, it was a lot of groundwork. Involved recruiting volunteers, materials preparation, partner outreach, soliciting legislator meetings, and also just doing some capital reconnaissance. So let's break that down in detail, talking about why we wanted to recruit volunteers. Let's head to the next slide. Okay, wanted to make sure you were still running it, Ken, and I was not. So we were lining them up primarily for these 4 to 5 things. We wanted to have legislative meetings, kind of in a hierarchy. We wanted to start with leadership, work our way down through the committees that would be considering the legislation, and then just getting to individual legislators to talk about how we were going to approach the session. It would have been phone calls and emails also included in that. Testimony, we were looking to line up people to do testimony on about 5 or 6 different topics, stating our position and also talking about our evaluation of the maps. And some of that would have been done by Fair District's core volunteers or staffers. But we needed some volunteers from the general community to come in and do some of that for us. And as Ken mentioned already, it was a compressed timeline, but that kind of doesn't really talk about the half of it. especially because the early reading we got from the governor was that there wasn't going to be no redistricting going on in a special session. And then, I don't know, 10 days later, maybe he reversed himself and called the session and put the redistricting in it. So it was definitely panic and scurry time, and we were able to do much less than we wanted to, but we were still gearing up. And frankly, the preparation we did for this one will probably aid us in any future legislative session we have to tackle. Next slide. The materials preparation involved getting signs ready for any visibility, also actually writing scripts and talking points for the testimony so that we could have stuff available for people when they came in to participate. Scripts and talking points, both because different people have different needs, and depending on how we reached out with different organizations, sometimes scripts would have been useful, or sometimes talking points would have been more powerful. So we needed to have both of those ready to go. And then we were also working on some joint communications with some key partners, particularly some of the nonpartisan groups that were active in this kind of stuff. Just to give you an example, these visuals at the bottom were the signs that we made up for the visibility at the start of the legislative session. The illustrations on the left, we had about 50 total signs, half and half of each of those. And then the Fair Maps equals Fair Elections with our website was on the back of every one of those. And those were done primarily because we wanted to have a presence at some of the so-called actions or activities that were done. We thought were going to be done throughout the session, but really were done primarily at the start of the session. And let's go on to the partner outreach. It turns out that the partner outreach for us in particular was very, very important. Some of the key groups were ACLU, League of Women Voters, Common Cause, Southern Poverty Law Center, Fair Count, and there were just a bunch of other voter protection groups that were working different angles. And sometimes there were more partisan groups that were also useful to partner up with. Necessary Trouble in particular was not the only one, but they were in the process of being a key player. And then there's a wealth of ad hoc groups that came together for this. I was trying to track them, and frankly, I can't even tell you all the groups that actually participated in this thing because it was so much chaos with this stuff coming together in such a short time fuse. And the overall value that came from working with these different groups was we could leverage them for resources and processes that we either did not have to develop or supply ourselves, which turned out to be great in terms of just leveraging our ability to be a player. And the three things I wanted to highlight were sources of training. So among other things, people who were going to do testimony training needed to know what to expect, how to approach it, and even have some coaching. And there were several of the organizations that we got plugged into that were offering this training multiple times online. So it was something we did not have to develop other than maybe doing personal coaching with some people on our messages. They could get trained through one of the other groups just by logging on to one of these online sessions that was open to everybody. Also, amplification of the Fair District's message. You know, primarily, I describe us mostly as we're the data nerds. We come in with an analysis of this map, and we want to make sure we give that feedback of the maps back to the legislators, but then also make that information available to the public so they can respond with that information. Well, we have a certain membership and we could pass it out to them, but it becomes much, much more powerful if we can get that message about our evaluation directly out to some of these other groups. And some of them were very, very receptive. It was like, yeah, plug us in. As soon as you get this stuff, give it to us and we'll get it out to our membership. And then one that well, at least I had not anticipated early on, was maybe coordination of the testimonies, which turned out to be very helpful. There were 5 or 6 specific messages that we wanted to get out. And that probably, if we really went all in, that probably would have meant 5 or 6 different people testifying. And we didn't know for sure, but there was a concern that representing ourselves as fair districts, or as a person from fair districts, that the subcommittee might, or sorry, the committee, not the subcommittee, might have said, well, okay, you're fair districts, you get one person, here's your 3 minutes. And that really would have truncated our ability to give the kind of feedback that we wanted to the committees, considering the maps. And so it was relatively powerful to plug into the other organizations and talk to them specifically about, okay, you're preparing testimony. What are you going to talk about? And in many cases, it already overlapped with what we wanted to talk about, or they were willing to carry some of our messages. So that was a very, very valuable element of being plugged in. Let's go to the Capitol visits. And it's not just Capitol visits, but it's basically just plugging into the legislators. We went through an extensive effort to secure meetings with committee chairs, et cetera. I say the committee chairs were the key people, but it was just the legislative leadership, committee members, and in some cases, just the general legislators. And we had essentially no success getting any meetings with anybody. And even more than no success, we had very, very limited response, in that a lot of the legislators didn't even bother to turn us down. We got a few no's, and then the rest, it just went into a black hole. It hasn't been that way in the past. The last legislative session and prior sessions, we've had a lot more success getting in to talk to legislators. And so one of my suspicions is, I don't know that, is that maybe they were anticipating that the activity would be withdrawn from the agenda from the legislature. We were getting scuttlebutt early on that maybe people were not really, the legislators were not really hot on this idea. And so they might have thought, this thing is going to die, or at least I don't know that it's going to live. And so I don't need to meet with fair districts or essentially anybody else on this issue right now. Don't know that, but suspecting that may be a part of the situation for the non-response. Part of the process that we did try to do was leave an email trail. We did some phone calls to contact legislators, some personal visits in the Capitol, actually before the session even started. So when I say visits, getting to their office. But part of that we wanted to do was to back everything up with an email trail. When we had a phone contact or an in-person contact initially, we still followed up with an email trail. So there was a documentation about what things we were trying to discuss, specifically inquiries about what was the process going to be, because we really were guessing at what the process was going to be, and offering to talk to them about what our evaluation was going to be. So there was a two-way street in terms of communication, and they weren't blindsided. They essentially could have the information before we started. It turned out not to be necessary, but that's probably going to be part of moving forward, so that we document whatever transparency, we document whatever two-way conversation there is. Before the session, we also got plugged into the Democratic Caucus policy team, which was very helpful. They, particularly because they were responsive, and just navigating the ins and outs of the process was helpful. They were one of the sources. In particular, one of the things they told us early on was the Democratic Caucus was unlikely, or at least leaning against, introducing their own maps. And that was useful information in terms of just knowing what we had to prepare for. Are we evaluating 6 maps, 3 maps, or however many maps? So that essentially cut the workload in half when we knew that. They were also helpful with just some of the backdoor understanding of what was going on. They were one of the sources telling us how long they thought the legislative session might last. And then that was also helpful for us to map out how the process would go in terms of a timeline over days and where we really had to gear up to interact. And there's also the Congressional Office on Reapportionment. Um, I made an effort to check in with the executive director, Gina Wright, to get plugged in. It happened before the legislative session started, so there basically was a skeleton crew there. And so I was not able to talk to her directly, but it kind of looked like they were just manning the office, making sure they had a person, a designated person there. And the person that happened to be there the day I went in was Dan O'Connor, who is officially identified as a redistricting data specialist. Another staffer in the building happened to refer to him as the guy that actually makes the maps. So it was nice to plug into him just to get a feel for who he was and be able to potentially have a communication channel there. So Ken, I think that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back to you, at least temporarily.
Thank you, Dave. All great work to prepare for. So we kind of had the behind the scenes work with, we were ready to address maps. Dave was laying the groundwork for conversations and so on. So what happened, right? So again, keep in mind that this legislative session was supposed to start on June 17th. The day before the session was June 16th. It was the last day of the primary runoff. And so things were getting a little busy in Georgia all of a sudden, right? So what happened on June 17th? Well, I think it was a combination of public pressure and some political calculus that caused him to not draw the maps, right? So on the 17th, there were several press conferences called. As you can see, tons of people showed up, including our team, with signs, and they packed the Capitol. The kickoff speaker for one of the press conferences was Senator Warnock, who had flown in from, or had stayed in Georgia, flown in just for the occasion, and flew back to the Senate, even though the Senate was in session, came in and made a speech. A number of people made very impassioned speeches about why this should not be done. Because again, at this point, we did not know whether they were going to, we thought that they were going to be drawing new maps and did not know whether we assumed that they were going to do that. But a lot of people are obviously saying, no, don't do this, right? You want to protect black voters, free and fair elections. All those themes were kind of wrapped up into a very, very large and very visible presence, which is good. So public pressure was clearly part of the angle. But I think there was also some political calculus going on, and we'll share with you our view on what that is. And so what happens was they decided to stand down. And so the morning of the 17th, really just before they actually gavelled in the session, the Speaker of the House, John Burns, who's this gentleman here in this picture, and Larry Walker, who is the Senate President pro tem, I believe, right, got up and gave a speech and said, we're not gonna redistrict now. And they issued a statement that I'll share with you in a second, basically saying we're not going to do this. We're decided not to do redistricting, right? Again, a lot of people were the cheer rose up in the Capitol. It was really heartwarming to hear all the people who had come down and wanted this to get turned off, and in fact, it was turned off, right? And so, great thing, victory for now. But as we'll talk about, I don't think this is a permanent answer. I think we're going to see more. I really love the two people who had the signs at the bottom of the page. What's the emergency people voting? I thought that was a really clever way to to position a point of view, right? So the official statement was this. The speaker released a letter just moments before that speech. I won't read you the whole letter. You can read it at your leisure. But what he basically said was, kind of used all the right words. We've always done redistricting to give careful consideration to constitutional requirements in Georgia's communities. We always allow ample time for public input. There are court cases still pending. We are confident that Georgia will prevail in these cases, yet they're not done. Therefore, changes should only be made after all the facts are understood. Um, I'll say that I don't agree with all those statements. They don't always allow much time for public input. I think the time they allow is very little. We'd like to change that process, but at the end of the day, they stood down and they gave all the quote right reasons. But what it doesn't say, and if you read between the lines on the way this on the speech said, this is now not the time to do redistricting. However, they clearly have left the door open, in my view, to do it again later, and later in this case might mean as soon as after this November's election, right? There's clearly a political motivation to do this. They've just decided not to do it now. They talked about cases in how courts are interpreting cases in other states, but of course, Georgia's cases are still pending, as we've talked about. And so, really, doing anything now is premature. And again, they weren't trying to change the maps for 26. The maps would only be changed for 2028. So, really, what is the rush? There really is no rush, right? So, that the official word said, here's why we're doing this. Now, I think a lot of people, just from what we've been able to figure out, is there is a political calculus involved, right? And what we observed is that neither party's rank and file members wanted to do this, right? Democrats seem to be opposed on principle, like this should not be done. This is not, we shouldn't be changing maps before 2030. There's nothing wrong with the current maps, right? That compel changes now. The court didn't say to do this. However, I think on the Republican side, my impression from few people I talked to was that they were more concerned about backlash. Like, if we do this, what is it going to look like, right? We got the sense from talking to people, and also there's a lot of stuff in the news. This is not like, secret stuff that we figured out that much, but a lot of the news articles that were written by reporters who had talked to people saying this was being pushed by members of leadership, some of whom are running for higher office and they're trying to score points, right? However, the June 16th primary result left different people in charge on June 17th than they might have expected. I'm going to stay away from naming names here. You can probably figure out who I'm talking about, some of the people. And again, as a nonpartisan organization, we don't cheer or lament who wins or loses elections, right? We're worried about, do the maps allow a fair election? But we have to be aware of what's going on with this political calculus so we understand the motivation, right? And so we think that some of the members supported the opponent who won. And so the people pushing for this really were no longer going to be in charge going forward. And so I think the appetite for doing it became a lot less. And I think at the end of the day, I think the bottom line was people decided this is not a politically smart move in this environment with a very contentious election. Could be a wave election. We don't know, right? We also got thought, some people have speculated, not us, that Governor Kemp may have put this opportunity to draw maps into the special session notice to allow this to happen, even though he may not have supported it all the way. Again, we don't know this. We didn't talk to the governor ourselves, but he may have opened the door for this in exchange for people supporting his candidates, not all of whom won, some of whom won, some of whom didn't, right? So they're really, because you're in an election season, it's right after the primary. There's a lot of political calculus. We probably don't know the half of it. This is kind of what we were able to suss out. But at the end of the day, they came to their senses and said, we're not going to do it. And so we believe that's smart. However, it is clear to us that the door is still open for another session, and it could actually be by the end of this year. So we are preparing for that eventuality. I'll turn it back to Dave now to talk about, so what do we learn from this exercise, and what do we do thinking about going forward?
It was actually kind of useful in that it was kind of a dry run for what we think we're going to have to deal with eventually. As Ken alluded to, we don't think this has gone away. We think it's just been deferred, which, is a victory, but it's only a temporary victory. And a number of us, again, as Ken alluded, we suspect this is really going to happen with another special session, probably in November of this year, after the elections happen, the general election happens. And there's several things that could drive it. If either the Republicans lose the governor office or the lieutenant governor office, or the control in one of the chambers flips, which I think is probably the least likely of all of the three areas. But even if it gets close, they might want to do something about redistricting while they have the current membership. So there's just lots of things that could trigger this. So we essentially have to gear up for this happening again in November of this year. And so the learnings that we got out of this are very important. Some of them I talked about before: amplifying the FDGA messages, training and other resources, covering the testimony topics, and informal information flow. As I talked about a little bit, it was chaos trying to figure out what is going on. And so it's like you're triangulating every time you have a conversation with somebody who's plugged in. It's the whole thing about the elephant, with the blind men touching various different parts of the elephant. You put all these things together and you finally figure out what the elephant looks like. But you're working with little pieces of information that come from a bunch of different sources, and that was very helpful. Um, we were worried about how big a presence we needed to have and what I'm just generally calling actions. So it's demonstrations or whatever. And that was just this juggernaut moving in its own. I think Ken refers to it as herding cats on catnip. Is that the way you said it, Ken? Something like that.
Herding cats, and they're all on catnip, and so it's just crazy.
Yeah. And what we realized, so that was consuming a lot of time. And what we realized is we want to be plugged in enough to participate in these actions, but we don't really have to provide any useful leadership. There's a lot of people out there, they're better plugged into communities, they have much more experience with this, and it's just better to let them do it and for us to ride along on that. And then what the overall message is, we need to be working now to prepare for any special session in late 26 or even the 2027 regular session. This will come back, or almost certainly will come back. And we had way too little time to prepare for it. But if we start now, we're fine. So I want to close out the legislative session and now go on to what the next thing we're going to focus on, which is the pledge campaign. As many of you may know, we've had a redistricting pledge out there that we've been asking legislators and in some cases candidates to sign, just not for specific bills, but to take a position on endorsing general principles on redistricting, when it should not be done, and how it should be done. And we have had the pledge out there. We have been pursuing it with various effort, depending on where we were in the legislative process. And we're going to retool that and fire it up again. And the overall goal is to approach all of the candidates in the legislative races now and try to get 33% of all the candidates to sign on, and get somebody signed on in 40% of all the district races. In particular, that's the ones that actually have more than one candidate in them. And this is kind of a minimum. We want to achieve at least this standard. So what we have to do is we have to go back and look at the pledge to see if it needs to be updated, specifically in light of the Calais decision, and that changed our policy statement, our policy stand somewhat, in that we were less explicitly dependent on the Voting Rights Act, even though we still think minority representation is important. So we want to make sure we still have the right pledge that we're asking people to sign. We've got to go through a process of cataloging all of the legislative candidates and how to get a hold of them, and then mine the Fair Districts membership list, particularly looking where we can line up members with the legislators. So if we have to approach them in person, or even on phone calls or emails, we can have somebody in their district that is reaching out to them. Let's do the other half. So we're going to launch it by August 28th, and it'll start with email solicitation and phone calls. We want to have at least 2 press releases out related to it, and we'd hope to start working on letters to the editor. And once we have that initial launch, then the execution of the rest of the campaign will be compiling the results. Who do we get these responses from? Hopefully mostly positive, but if they're negative, then how do we follow up on that? and then scheduling the follow-up, which I think will escalate. That will be where we'll try to go to in-person meetings probably. And most importantly, we're going to scorecard this. We're going to make it a public scorecard available on the website and probably in some other places. And we not only want to have, how are we doing on the percentages, but we also want to be able to put individual responses up there. We cannot endorse or support individual candidates, but we can tell the public how each of the candidates responded or sits on this particular issue. So let's talk about how you all can be involved in any of this process. We're looking for people for both the pledge campaign and then ultimately when we go back to the legislative engagement. The pledge campaign is compiling the contact information and doing the working the contacts and the tracking of the response. And then eventually in the legislative engagement, we're going to cycle back on all the other stuff we were trying to do before. Emails, telephone calls, doing office visits, and ultimately scheduling testimony. If you're interested in any of this, you can contact me directly just by emailing advocates@fairdistrictsgeorgia.org. So I'll give you a minute to digest that. It's not an email that's identified with me, but I'm primarily the one that goes into this email and responds to it. So essentially, if you go to advocates@fairdistrictsgeorgia.org, just say what you might be interested in doing, or if it's just, hey, plug me in, how can I help? I'll call you back and we'll talk about it and see what's a good fit for you in terms of your skills, your time, your availability, all those things. And I want to say we really do appreciate the people that volunteer for this. A few key players, even though we like to engage as broadly as possible and we'll need some help there, a few key volunteers can really make a big difference in how this thing works. The last thing I'd like to talk about is some other gerrymandering reform that's being worked on. So Ken, we're good to go on this. Do we have enough time I can probably do this in about 5 minutes.
Try to keep it to a couple.
Okay, a couple of minutes. All right. So mostly this is to send a message that we're not out here by ourselves. In the U.S. Congress, the House, there is a problem solvers caucus, and they have decided to pick up gerrymandering, redistricting reform as their issue right now. And what's key about the problem solvers caucus is it is by design a 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats. And to get behind an initiative, they have to at least have 70% of their members behind it, and 50% of both parties have to be behind it. That's of the people in the caucus. And so the fact that they adopted this is great. And it lines up in a few key areas with what we're trying to do. And I'll just hit those quickly. On their 5 principles, the stability and predictability and representation are really key, because part of what we have been complaining about is when you redistrict every 2 years, there's no relationship between the legislator and their constituents. Need more stability in that. Transparency has also been something we've been banging the drum about. Being open about where all these maps come from, how you made them, and displaying them in enough time that people can comment on them and have an impact on them. And then what was also useful, the other bold thing down the bottom where they said respect for communities and political subdivisions. We are probably going to be championing communities of interest. And the fact that they're picking up on that language, or at least inferring that language, is really, really helpful. And they also have 4 core reforms that are part of this. And the big one for us that showed up at the beginning is once a decade redistricting. There are many angles that we want to get working on this, but we think once a decade redistricting will solve a lot of problems, and that is explicit in one of their reforms. And then under the nationwide uniform standards, one of the things they are suggesting rejecting the partisanship, and in particular under the partisan influence, one of the things they're suggesting is independent commissions as an option. And that is also something that we're very strongly interested in. So we are excited to see this happening at a national level, and the fact that it lines up uh, so well for the stuff that we've already expressed an interest in. That's it, Ken. You can have it back. Yeah, we can skip this.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. I'm going to cover just a couple quick things before we close. A couple of new things on our website. Number one is we talked back in May about the poll that we did, and we used that poll extensively in our messaging around around the legislative advocacy work, preparing for the Capitol. We did press releases on it. That poll document, this little two-page summary, is on our website. I think there's a link maybe going in the chat at this point, which should have that information, but you can quickly find it on our website. There's a two-page summary, which you're seeing here, that you can print, you can distribute. This poll was jointly commissioned by the ACLU, Common Cause, us, and the League of Women Voters, so we thank our partners for doing that. It's a very nice summary. Basically says voters want fairness, they want partisan, they want competition, they would love to see an independent commission, etc. And so I'm not going to go through that in detail. We talked about that in our last meeting, but at the end of the day, it's now available for you to use. Give it to your candidates, share with your neighbors. If you sell copies, give us a royalty back. But no, it's free information. It's all public information. The second thing that's I'll talk about is just kind of where the research team goes next as we get ready to prepare for another round. We are going to be working on benchmarks. We're going to continue to refine those results. We have a little working group that's set up between us and University of Georgia, a professor at Georgia Tech, and the Electoral Innovation Lab, which is the new Princeton Gerrymandering Group, is now called EIL. We're going to be preparing for the next round of maps, so Vish is going to be very busy trying to refine what we've been doing on the benchmarking and figuring out how to do that. The map comparison tool, we've got that ready to go. We might be trying to put that on our website at some point in the future so that you can submit a map and have it compared or do some comparison on your own. Not quite sure about that one yet, but there is on our website, there will be in the next couple of days a brand new Georgia Explorer map, and I'm going to talk just quickly about what that is. Um, Basically, the Georgia Explorer map is our map that shows for Congress and State House and State Senate all the information you might want to know about a district in terms of demographic population lean, partisan lean, competition, and so on. And it's now updated with election data that goes from 2018 all the way to 2024. And it's got new census data. It's got some information from the most recent American Community Survey that doesn't give new census head counts, but it gives us better insight into the changing diversity of Georgia and the characteristics of population, right? And so if I'm going to try to get to Q&A here, I have a potential quick demo I could do of this map. But there's a link going in the website, should in the chat now up at the Explorer map. The old one is still posted. In a couple days, you should see the new one. And I think what I'm going to do is, in the interest of time, skip the demo unless we have no questions, in which case I'll circle back and just do it as we close out time. Look, supporting us, we put out a lot of effort, as you know, to get this program together and to get our preparations together. There are two ways to support us. We have a Fair Districts Georgia Foundation, which is a tax-deductible charity, 501(c)(3), and then the Fair Districts Georgia, which is the advocacy and lobbying side, is not tax-deductible. We would appreciate your financial support to either one of those sides of the organization. You can get through both of them on our website, fairdistrictsg.org/support, and we would thank you very much for that support. Now, as Dave mentioned, we are going to be kicking off the pledge campaign, and we are going to do another town hall. We haven't set the date yet, but look for a message from us in late August or early September. We are going to be doing another town hall giving you the details on how the pledge campaign is going to work, how we're going to reach out to all the candidates, and what you can do personally to get involved and talk to your candidates and get them to sign the pledge. You can approach your candidates directly. We will arm you with the information you need, the forms you need, and the response mechanism. So look for that town hall pledge. I look for that next town hall, late August or early September. We will announce that probably within a week or so that you're prepared to do that. Again, this is a I think about this as Fair maps are on the ballot this year. This is a hot issue across the country, as you know. It's now a hot issue in Georgia. It could still be a hot issue after the election, but we should be thinking of this campaign as, reforming redistricting, maintaining fair maps is an issue here. We know that there are different opinions on what should be done with respect to another change, another round of changes before 2030. Our view, of course, is the maps are fine, they should not be touched. But again, that's an issue that can be raised. I know that candidates are campaigning on this issue. I'll thank publicly Eric Isler, who's here with us, who has made it part of his campaign. So thank you. But this is an issue that can be part of the what will be part of the election, and this is your campaign. You as volunteers can get involved with the pledge campaign, and we'll have another town hall to talk about that. So I'm going to stop here and see if we have questions. And if there are questions, we'll answer them. And if not, I'll use the remaining time to do a quick demo of the new tool on the website. So we'll take a look at the chat and see what we have in the way of questions. Um, just going to look back here and see.
So there's a
Uh,
question. Oh, can you hear
yeah,
me,
go
Ken?
ahead. Go ahead, Beth. You go. You
Yeah,
go.
yeah. So there's a question about that the somebody understanding the state legislators draw the maps, but asking if the pledge covers all the different kinds of map drawing that happens in the state of Georgia. Who are the audience for the pledge? I think is part of the question.
So I think certainly the state legislature is the focus of our pledge, meaning the candidates for the assembly, because that's where the reform will happen. Of course, we love this idea of the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress, and we can reach out to our Congress people now and talk to them about that. But a focus of our pledge campaign is the members of the assembly. The members of the assembly vote on the process, and that process covers congressional maps, state house, state senate, county maps, school board maps, and some municipal maps, right? Even though those are drawn locally in many cases, they have to go through the legislature and the laws governing the process, and as well as Public Service Commission, by the way. I didn't mention that one. And so the focus of the campaign is to get our state candidates for the assembly on board with change.
Uh, and there's another question about any updates on proportional representation. Um, and somebody's offering to help out on that. Harry Underwood. Thank you, Harry.
Oh, yes, Harry, yes, thank you. So that really refers to, are we thinking about other ways to solve the problem besides just correcting maps? Like, can we change the way people are represented in Georgia? Can we do ranked choice voting, some of those things? Harry, have not yet gotten to it. We were a little bit busy in the last couple of months, but we've got your name down as somebody who'd like to help with that. Appreciate that. Are there any other questions? I don't see any at the moment. Well, what I'm going to do is jump into this little quick demo for you. And then if a question pops in, Beth, just interrupt me. If you can watch the chat, can you do
And
that while I do this demo?
I will do that, Ken.
All right. And then we'll answer questions, but I'll quickly do the demo. Um, there is a question from Representative Almaty Holly.
Yeah.
uh, Legislators may be very likely return to session before is fair districts plenty organized. The answer, Representative, is yet yes. We are gearing up for a potential another go round of special session, assuming it would be post election. That's exactly what we're gearing up for in terms of benchmarking tools, advocacy. Absolutely. Obviously, the pledge campaign in the interim, we would love to have your support on the pledge as well. I'm pretty sure you'll do that for us. But yes, absolutely, we are gearing up for that eventuality. Even if it happens in January, as part of the next session, we are
So
gearing up for whatever happens next.
And I think that the email that Dave gave, which I put in the chat, that anybody who's interested in helping, we can always use assistance, because not only are we going to be gearing up for anything that might happen related to the session going forward, but also looking to expand our abilities to reach into communities and do outreach to help more people understand why fair districts is so important.
Yep,
Send us your contact information if you'd like to help.
right. Perfect. Okay, let me just quickly switch to a demo if I can. I'm gonna do this very quickly. You're not gonna have time to learn it all, but you can watch the replay of the session. So this is the new Georgia Explorer map. I'm showing you the beta version, which is not live yet, but just give you a sense for what you can use this for, right? So right now, my screen is pointing at the current state Senate map. We have a library of maps, as you can see. Can you see the screen, by the way? I think you can. We have a library of all the current maps, and then the prior maps, and then older maps from years past that you can dig into. I'm just going to use the state Senate map. Actually, I'm going to use the state house map since we have two state house reps here as an example. So this is a map of all the state house districts currently in place. I'm going to go to District 116. That happens to be Representative Ahmadi Hali's district. So in this search box, I can type my address. I can type a home address and find that. I can type a county. I can type anything I want. I'm going to say D116. That's going to highlight District 116, which is southeast of Atlanta. That's the physical map of it. Now I can display on that, I can display a wealth of information. I can look, for example, at percent of minority voting age population as a whole, the summary of that map. You can see if I zoom out, you can see that across the whole state. But here it shows that that population is somewhere between 50 and 75%. I can break that down at a precinct level. If I click on precincts and turn off districts, I can see that here is that district again. I'm going to highlight it again. You can see how that population demographic lays out across different precincts within the district. I can look at minority voting age population. I can look at black voting age population, same model. There's the number. I can also look at the partisan lean of this district. The partisan lean we calculate based on 6 statewide elections. We have governor, president, and U.S. Senate, and we use the elections from 2018 to 2024 to calculate an estimated partisan lean of this district. And so this district says that partisan lean is about 83% Democrat, 17% Republican. That's just based on voting patterns. That's not a preference. And if I click over here on this election tab, it shows me how the voters in this district voted in each of those major elections. We don't show the election result for the state rep election. We're really using the statewide elections as an index to calculate a partisan index. We have census data in here about characteristics, households, parents, median income, those kinds of things, um, and stuff like that. There is also in here, which we're going to have a contact list that shows who is your state representative for this district. There you are, sir, as well as other districts that overlap this one in terms of the state senate and the state and the congressional representative, as well as our U.S. senators. So again, you can do this for any district. If I go back to the state senate, for example, I can pull up State Senate District 26. Here's State Senate District 26, I think, if I got this right. Let me turn this off so I can see that. There it is. So it's a much bigger district. You can see all the precinct lines in there. You can also pop up and see what cities are involved here. There are no cities, I think, involved. There's one city that's mapped into District 23, happens to be the city of Milledgeville, as it turns out. So you can see the cities overlaid as well. So again, we're over time here. This is a great resource for people who want to understand how the district looks. And again, you can look at the replay of this, play around with this. If you have any thoughts or suggestions on it, again, you can get back to us. So I'm going to say that's all for the quick demo. This should be on our website in the next couple of days. I'm going to say thank you all for joining the meeting tonight. Are there any other questions here? Did we get any other questions? No, just some thanks. Again, thank you all very much for joining the meeting tonight. Watch for our next announcement of the meeting to talk about the pledge campaign in late August or early September. Thank you much for coming. Good night.